cranky Citlali will break her enemy's legs, and today I'm here to tell you how to build her best. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So what artifacts does this grumpy grandmother desire? None other than 4-piece Cinder City. There is literally no reason to use any of her set. She'll be the 4th slot support in every team that you use her in, making her an ideal Cinder City holder. You get energy from the 2-piece if there's Night Soul bursts being triggered, and she'll be providing everyone with a whopping 40% damage bonus. Can't get much better than this. Farm this for her as soon as possible. If you already have a 4-piece Cinder user in your team, then you can opt for Instructors instead to offer EM to your whole comp. Considering that you'll generally always be playing her in forward melt teams, it's an excellent alternative. Its main drawback is being a 4-star artifact set, so you miss out on level 20 main stat values. 4-piece Tenacity works as another non-Cinder option if you've already got another user in the team. You can also access plus 20 values here, so that's a cool bonus. 2-piece mix and match sets include 2-piece EM, Night Soul energy percent, and ER percent. As for Citlali's main stats, simple. Go for ER percent, EM. Her entire kit, including both her shield and A4, all scale heavily off of EM. It'll offer you the best protectiveness from her shield while also aiding her decent personal damage. If you're using her on an ER percent weapon, then you can swap her sands out for EM instead. Her burst is pretty solid, so you want to make sure that you build enough energy to cast it consistently. Make sure that you're meeting these requirements in all of her different teams. Her personal damage isn't mind-boggling, but it's certainly a splendid bonus. This fearsome almighty granny is not to be taken lightly, as she's the strongest person in her tribe. She's gonna need a good weapon to uphold her reputation, so what'll her best choices be? None other than Starcaller's Watch. This is a really nice weapon, a very solid EM stat stick which benefits Granny Itzley super significantly. It's great for your team too, because it's able to buff the damage that your on-field DPS deals, so it expands the supportive capabilities that she's able to offer, not to mention that the passive is super easy to trigger. Great weapon pick. Sacrificial Fragments works excellently due to it being an EM stick, which is pretty much all that Citlali really wants. It's as simple as that, the passive doesn't matter all that much. Wandering Evenstar will both provide your grandmother with a sizable EM stick, along with being able to turn all of that EM into some team-wide attack percent buffing. Excellent when using your crazed granny in teams with an attack scaling main DPS. For example, Moika, Linny, or Arlecchino teams. Mappa Mare is a perfectly fine free-to-play friendly craftable option which will work if you don't have any of the other weapons which I've already mentioned. It's a pretty decent EM stick. Prototype Amber will work fine for the sake of the energy generation in its passive, but the HP percent is wasted on her since Citlali's shield scalings are entirely based on EM, so it's pretty much just for the energy and minor healing. I wouldn't advise using this as your sole source of fanfare generation. It would be a nice extra source of it, but you should still have a proper healer in your team for consistent fanfare generation. Any weapon with an ER percent main stat will work fine, just to make sure that you're using an EM Sands over an ER one if you plan to go down this route. Thrilling Tales will work fine if you want to buff your teammates. However, keep in mind that you're missing out on a good bit of EM by doing so. I'd advise going for Wandering Evenstar instead if you can, since you'll get attack percent buffs plus EM for your Citlali. However, if you're fine with having a weaker shield, then an R5 TDDS will be one of your best bets when it comes to buffing your attack scaling DPSs. 1,000 Floating Dreams works too, thanks to all of the EM. It buffs your team's EM too, and considering that she's mostly a forward melt unit, this is basically always going to be useful. Magic Guide only matters due to the EM. The passive is essentially always going to be next to useless. Citlali has a plethora of fantastic weapon picks. She's super free to play friendly while having excellent high investment options. You should most definitely be able to put something together for her. Who is brave enough to team up with our intimidating grandmother? Well, she primarily specializes in forward melt teams. These are teams where there is a Pyro main DPS that melts Pyro on top of Cryo application. The most standard best in slot use case for Citlali would be when she is used as a forward melt support for Moika. The Exalted Pyro Archon is capable of dealing some stupidly high damage numbers. Being able to melt most of her hits is insanely powerful, and the party doesn't even stop there. Consider that the crazed Granny can reduce Pyro and Hydro Res by 20% via her A1. Pair that on top of her Cinder City buff, and you've got yourself one of the strongest melt-based teams in the game. Okay, sounds all fine and dandy. But is Citlali's cryo application actually enough for Moika to melt consistently? This is a question that I was asked on my guide about the Blazing Queen. The grandmother on her own won't provide enough cryo for her to melt literally every single hit. However, you should still be able to do so for most of her hits. It'll still be a super effective melt team. Keep in mind that Shilonen uses 4-piece Archaic Petra here since you can't have 2 Cinder City holders in one team. Alternatively, you could use Instructors on Citlali. If you care a lot about melting every single Moika hit, you can manage that by replacing Shilonen with 2 potential options. Know that using the DJ Cat and getting melts most of the time will be stronger than replacing her with another cryo option that can help the Pyro Archon melt every hit. However, in doing so, you free up your Shilonen and can play melt super consistently. One way is with a C6 Elegy Diona. Yes, finally Diona has an actual use case, and so does that C6 of hers. The EM is absolutely splendid for Melt, with the Elegy buffing being absolutely excellent for the entire team. You can use this setup without Elegy 2 as long as you have Diona C6. Splendid way to apply more cryo while gaining some additional offense. Ganyu can form a really good double cryo core too. You get a lovely amount of cryo application while also being able to appreciate some extra team-wide damage. This is certainly a lovely way to use your Ganyu. As a massive fan of the Coco Goat, I absolutely love how the Exalted Pyro Archon has done so much to buff her. Fellow Ganyu enjoyers, rise up! So yes, while Moeka might not be able to melt every hit with only Citlali, that's fine. Using Shilonen for her buffing will be more worth it anyway. Otherwise, just use one of those double cryo options. I wouldn't really sweat it too much. You can even consider using Lady Farina over the DJ Cat in these teams, and because Bennett's healing is present, you'll be covered perfectly fine in terms of fanfare. Citlali reduces Hydro Res via her A1 too, so all sources of Pyro and Hydro Elemental damage in this team are getting buffed. Truly the best of both worlds. Know that for literally every team that I have talked about, you can replace Moeka with Arlecchino or Linny, and it will work really well too. Both of those characters can also run forward melt teams really well. I'd like to bring a special highlight to the Linny, Moeka, Bennett, Citlali team though. You get all of the benefits of Linny's Pyro passive while having the crazy Granny around to offer cryo application for melts. Example forward melt teams include Moeka, Bennett, Citlali, Shilonen, the Pyro Archon, Unlucky Kid, C6 Diona, Granny Itzli, the Son of Caledon, Bennett, Ganyu, the Plushie Enjoyer, Flaming Legend, Bennett, Lady Farina, Pillow Flyer, Linny, Caesar King's lost cousin, Bennett, and the all-powerful Retirement Home Legend. His dad, the Hydro Archon, oh my goodness, Bennett is inescapable, and Citlali. You get the idea at this point. Any Pyro DPS can work in place of Notlon's very own Caesar King. I'd like to briefly mention how Hoyoverse finally gave Mr. Settle Down another buff. Goodness, I was hoping for this. That character was so weak and unplayable before. It's as simple as this. Citlali can act as a highly acceptable replacement in Nouvelette's Celestia killer team. She can proc Cinder City, reduce enemy Hydro Res, and if you have her signature, then there's also increasing the damage that Nouvelette deals when he's on field. What do I even say, dude? Hoyo clearly has favorites. I'd like to point out that she can work nicely in Chaska teams. Generally, it'll be much better to use Farina over the crazed Granny here. However, she's still a real neat teammate. And because Chaska infuses bullets elementally, you can take advantage of Citlali's A1 despite her being a character of the Animo element. You can also use her as a replacement for Shenhe and Bennett's Farina Shenhe teams. Example teams include Chaska, Bennett, Citlali, Moeka, Gunwoman, Boken to Boken, Get Off My Lawn, and Lady Farina. As long as you have either a Pyro DPS of some variety, or Mr. Settle Down, your Citlali will have a team that she can excellently slide into and support. Yet how does this wild grandmother work? Well, her normals will deal up to 3 basic cryo strikes. Nothing much to add here. As for her skill, she'll enter the Night Soul's Blessing state and put up a heavily EM scaling shield. She'll also summon a plushie, which upon having Citlali reaching 50 Night Soul points, will deal cryo damage throughout the duration of Citlali's Night Soul Blessing state. Fairly simple stuff. As for her burst, she'll throw out her plushies and deal a big cryo blast which is capable of dealing some solid personal damage. It'll restore Night Soul for her too based on Spirit Vessel Skulls. She can summon up to 3 via her burst, 1 for each enemy that's near her, so in single target scenarios, which is the most common type of scenario in modern day endgame, you'll typically be generating 1 skull per burst. As for Citlali's Ascension passives, simple. Her A1 is what stores her Pyro and Hydro Res shred. It's so dumb that this doesn't shred Cryo too, but whatever man. Really nice and forward melt and Nouvelette teams. This A1 really encourages you to play this character within them. It restores some Night Soul for her too, which is always neat. Her A4 gives her personal damage a stupidly high amount of additional EM scaling. Absolutely splendid A4 which will add more value to the stats that she already builds. As for her talent priority, simple, go for this. Her normal attacks don't really do anything, so just ignore them. Her skill will be one of the most important parts of her kit, so make sure to level it first. You upgrade both her personal damage and shield when you level that skill of hers, but you absolutely should not neglect that burst of hers. The damage is certainly worth your time. Make sure you level them both. My advice? Try to aim for a final talent spread of 199. Surrender your offerings to the almighty Granny Itzli, and just maybe, if she's feeling generous, she'll exchange some constellations with you. Speaking of which, let's talk about those. This is a splendid supportive C1 that utilizes all of the EM that Citlali builds in order to support your on-field damage dealer more effectively, while also offering some improvements to your exploration mechanics. Brilliant C1, consider yourself lucky if you end up stumbling upon it. Truly an excellent DPS increase to all of the teams that she plays in. This'll buffer A4's res shred up to 40%, while also giving them a crud ton of VM. Your forward melt teams will crush the competition with this. Nouvelette won't benefit from this as much, since he can't use the EM, but the extra 20% hydro shred is a big deal for him. Fantastic C2. Plus 3 to that skill of hers is a highly welcomed upgrade. Neat C3, but certainly not anything necessary. This C4 provides Citlali with even more EM scaling damage sources, increasing her personal output by quite a significant margin. Pretty good for a C4, Genshin's Constellation design has seriously come a long way since then. Plus 3 to that powerful burst of hers is pretty welcome at this stage, a nice damage increase. This C6 will not only benefit your Hydro and Pyro DPS characters, but it will also benefit your Citlali's personal damage, a very unique and specific C6. If you're interested in its value in terms of the whale meta, it's somewhat niche. Yes, it's obviously good if we look at it from a general perspective, but I would never recommend this as someone's first C6. Moika C6 is the best in the entire game by a really wide margin, with only C6 Mualani being able to compete, and that most likely won't change until Viserita comes out. And what do you know? She's running on banners next to Citlali right now. Always get a main carry as your first C6 in my opinion, then pull over high investment supports around them. It's more efficient to C6 Moika and then get C2 Citlali, unless you're simply a huge Citlali fan that loves her very, very much. In which case, you can forget about all of that aquatic mammal jargon and enjoy the fact that she has a good C6. And as always, remember, this whole game can be easily cleared by C0 5-star characters on 4-star weapons. High investment isn't necessary. I would go for her C1 and C2 first, then her weapon, then it's up to you if you want the rest of her constellations. Great high investment lineup, but remember, they're not a necessity in the slightest. My only real major gripe with her kit is that she doesn't buff crowd characters themselves. That's admittedly a huge point of disappointment that I have with her kit. Even so, I'm actually really happy with how she turned out. The plushie gimmick is real neat as somebody who's a plushie connoisseur myself, and I'm super happy with her synergy alongside the likes of Linny and Moika. Still, I think this is maybe the 4th Nouvelette buff that we've gotten in Not Long so far. We get it, Hoyo, you love the Hydro Dragon. Either way, I'm happy with her. Also, she's a really funny character in general, so I'm quite fond of her. How about yourself? Did she meet your expectations, or is the almighty Granny Itzlin not as all-powerful as you first thought? Let me know down below in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hopefully this video was able to get your Citlali striking indescribable fear into her enemies at the mere mention of her name. This has been Juice, signing out, and does Hoyoverse have a thing for eccentric geriatrics?